Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation, Your Excellency.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to the Situation Room. I'm honored to be here today, and I hope that we'll have a very fruitful and useful discussion.
You know, we call this the hot seat. I am not sure whether it would be appropriate for it to be called the hot seat for you. You've experienced some hotter seats, but no, this is the hot seat of Kenya's biggest conversation. Karibu.
It might be a hot seat to me too.
Indeed. Ambassador, a number of things have happened in your country in just the last, 5 months? And your country has then occupied the global news cycle over the last 5 months because of what has happened. Of course, this must have started earlier. This must have been, a build-up of something. But in February, Russian troops invaded your country. And since then, a lot has happened, not just in your country, but globally. What is the background to this? What is the history between that led to Russia's invasion of your country?
I can talk about the history of Ukrainian-Russian relations for hours. I understand that we have time limitation, and I will really do my best to be brief. All that started thousands of years ago. At the 8th century, the state called Kievskaya Rus had been established with a capital city based in Kiev, which is my home city and which is the capital of Ukraine. Then the Kievan Rus existed as a sovereign state and one of the most powerful states in Europe for 400 years. Then Tatar Mongols came with the invasion of all that state, and Kievan Rus stopped to exist as such. And after the Tatar Mongol invasions, different sovereignties had been established, and one of them was Moscovia, and the name was Moscovia because the capital city of that state was Moscow, which actually had been established by the Kievan ruler called Yuri the Long Hand, or Yuri Dolgoruki as we called him. And then in the beginning of 18th century, very end of the 17th, beginning of 18th, Peter the Great, the Russian Tsar, came to power. And he actually been advised to change the name of the state from Moscovia to Russia. The reasoning behind that was that by using the first 3 letters in name Russia, is Rus, they tried in a way to pretend that they're continuators of the old Kievan Rus. And from that on, they were trying to steal our history. They were trying to subjugate Ukrainians. They were trying to ban our language. And many other atrocities, to be honest with you. But thanks to Ukrainian resilience, we stood, and we've preserved our culture, we preserved our language, and during the history, we've actually been independent 3 times. The first time was the second part of the 17th century, and we managed to stay independent for a little bit more than 40 years. Then Peter the Great actually again occupied Ukraine, Russian troops rather, on the orders of Peter the Great. Then the second time we've been independent only for 5 years in the beginning of 20th century, from 1917 to 1922. Then actually then Russian Bolshevik troops came to Ukraine and made us to join Soviet Union in 1922. Now it's a third chance for Ukraine to stay independent. We became independent in 1991 on the 24th of August. Now we'll commemorate, because it's no time for celebration, but we'll commemorate the 31st anniversary of our independence this year on the 21st of August. And I hope this time that independence is forever. At least the whole Ukrainian society is determined to fight for our independence, for our identity, for our future and future of our kids.
What has been, if I may ask, Ambassador, what has been if there were elements or factors that has remained the interest? I mean, we're looking at from the 8th century, Russia's interest in Ukraine. Are we seeing the same things up until date? We're looking at hopefully another independence this year. Are we looking at more or less similar issues that remain the interest of Russia in Ukraine until today?
Unfortunately for us, Russian being an empire has a view that all East Slavic nations are part of Russian identity. Even Russian President Putin on many occasions stated that Ukrainian and Russian language is the same language. And Ukrainian language is not a separate language, but rather a dialect of Russian language, which is not true. And I can also spend hours talking about that, but I can give you a sound example, which I really like. Love in Russian is любовь. Love in Ukrainian is кохання. The true fact is, and I have to be honest, and I'm not going to use any propaganda here, that around 20-25% of words used in Russian and Ukrainian languages sound similar, and some of them even have the similar meaning. But still, 75-80% of words are different, having different meaning, sound completely different. And although we can understand Russian language due to the fact that we've been forced to be part of Russian Empire for centuries, it's not our language. And our own language is Ukrainian. It's different from Russian. And by saying that Russian and Ukrainian is the same language is, I would say, honestly, my opinion, is a huge mistake.
It's a fallacy.
Definitely, that's a Russian policy, and not only Russian president, but most of Russian political elites for centuries, and now trying to use the propaganda to prove to Russian people the fact that we are the same, but we are not. Okay, we have something in common from our history. That's a correct fact, and I'm not going to argue that. But we are different, and we want to live our own lives, and we don't want anyone to say us how we should live, what society we should build, what unions we should join.
It sounds like sorry, Siti.
No, go ahead, please.
Sounds like, Your Excellency, the way you've even given us the history of the Ukrainian people from Kiev. There's always been some interaction with other peoples. And in some cases, maybe some influence coming in from other peoples, whether it's the Russians or the others who came in, or the Mongols, or even after you gained your independence and you declared this last independence in 1991, there has been external influence, either coming from Europe or coming from Russia. Is there a period in which the Ukrainian people have actually exerted influence into other cultures and not vice versa?
Oh, definitely. It goes back to the 11th century. Again, I can talk about that for hours, but I can give you one of the most famous examples. The daughter of a ruler of Kiev's Rus, whose name was Yaroslav the Wise, Anna Yaroslavna, as we call her. She was the wife of the French King Henry II. And the interesting and hilarious fact is that she could write and read, and he did not. And on the decrees, he put the cross and he signed them on royal edifices. And she brought the Bible from Kiev to France. And from then on, all French kings make the oath of allegiance on that Bible in the Reims Cathedral. And this Bible is still there in Reims Cathedral. Means that we have that interactions with different nations in Europe and beyond, starting from the 11th century. And definitely when we got independence in 1991 again, we start interacting with all the countries. And our foreign policy goal is, and always will be, to interact with all the countries in the world, trying to build friendly relations, trying to be friendly, trying to help countries if there is need for that, to develop their science, culture, to develop our ties with people-to-people contacts, because we consider people-to-people contacts as one of the most important tools of the foreign policy, I could say, because again, if you're only trying to build up relations with political elites of the particular country, but not trying to build the same relations with people, I think that foreign policy will not be successful. That is why we always paid a lot of attention to establishing direct contacts between people of Ukraine and foreign countries. And I am proud that I'm trying to do the same here in Kenya. And I'm here for a little bit more than 3.5 years. And I can tell you honestly that I was enriching myself by your culture, and I really got to know a lot of things which I didn't know before I came to Kenya, and I'm really happy about that.
Your Excellency, it's a tripartite question. It's 3 in 1.
Okay.
Are they ethnic Russians who are citizens of Ukraine? If indeed they are, what percentage of the population are they, and in which part of the country do you find them?
The Russian minority, as we call them, consist of probably 11 to 12% of Ukrainian population. Means the population of Ukraine now is around 47 million people. That means that around 5 to 6 million people are ethnic Russians. They have been living in Ukraine for centuries. And I can tell you honestly and proudly that we never tried to ban Russian language, as Russian propaganda are trying to tell to the whole world. Even now, if you go to Ukraine, you can find TV stations, radio stations, which use Russian language. You can come across with a number of people talking Russian, and no one trying to ban Russian language, never ever, and no one will beat you for talking Russian. That's all Russian propaganda and fake news. And I can tell you that I personally know a lot of Russian-speaking Ukrainians who are now fighting at front lines. And to prove the fact, anyone can go to YouTube or TikTok or Instagram and find hundreds of short videos where Russian-speaking Ukrainians are asking Russian troops and asking Russian president to go where the Russian ship went.
Around the beginning of this particular invasion of Ukraine, there are incidences that occurred at the border. And unfortunately, those incidences that were highlighted by the world media involved African students. Now, it painted a not too pleasant picture of Ukraine. Please comment on it.
When the invasion started, it was really, really a challenging situation. Hundreds of thousands of people were trying to flee from Ukraine. Among them, thousands of African students. And I have to be honest with you, and I have to acknowledge the fact that there were some, or I would say rather few occasions where African students treated in not right way.
Yes.
But first of all, I would like to apologize for that. Although I'm convinced that even that skated cases, few cases which took place, were not intentional and were not with intention to show, superiority of Ukrainians over African people and African nations and African students. I would ask you to take into account that Ukrainian border guards worked so hard 24/7 that probably on some occasions they were not polite enough. And we already apologized for that. I'm apologizing now again for that. And believe me, we really care about African students who were studied in Ukraine, whose dreams were ruined as a result of Russian unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine. Because all these young African students were happily studying in Ukraine, were enjoying life in Ukraine, dreaming of get bachelor degree or master degree, dreaming of starting their own business, their own career. Now all these plans have been ruined, because all of them had to come back to their home countries or go somewhere else to pursue their studies. But I'm sure that when the war ends, we will be happy to greet a new wave of African students coming to Ukraine. And I'm sure that will be the case, since Ukrainian education and the quality of Ukrainian education is one of the best in the world. But it's better than some others because the price you have to pay is not as high and is not as high as many other countries. But still, the quality is very high, especially in electrical engineering, in aerospace, in IT, in medicine, and that's mainly all the subjects and all the areas of studies which African students usually took.
Your Excellency, what is the human toll? What is the impact of Russia's invasion on Ukraine today? It may be difficult for us to really appreciate the extent to which an impact has been had on Ukraine by this invasion. So what are we looking at as of today?
As of today, we're looking on two different things. The first thing is destruction of infrastructure. Hundreds of kilometers of roads, hundreds of bridges already destroyed. The number of hospitals, schools, residential buildings, offices. That is what, when we take into account infrastructure and immaterial objects. But we also have to take into account the human sufferings. For now, around 3 million Ukrainians had to flee to different countries. Most of them from areas where hostilities took place. Most of these people lost their homes. Many of them even lost their close relatives. And additional to, this 3 million who had to flee, there are 7 million internally displaced persons. Not to mention that by of today, thousands of civilians had been killed, among them almost 600 kids. The last kid killed by Russian missile is a 4-year-old girl, and she was killed during the Russian missile attack on city of Vinnytsia, on residential areas, on civilian objects, not on the military installations. And that girl was only 4 years old, and she's not with us anymore. And why the kids had to pay the price? It's not understandable. And I think that all those who committed these atrocities, all Russian soldiers, all Russian officers, will be brought to justice rather sooner than later.
Let's take a break on this note. It's 8:30. This is the Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. We're live on SpiceFM, KTN Home. We're also live on YouTube and Facebook. Coming out into the break with Ambassador, His Excellency Andriy Pravednyk. He is the Ukrainian ambassador to Kenya. We are talking about Russia's invasion of Ukraine several months down the road, the impact that is having on the country and the impact it's having on the world, especially when it comes to energy, when it comes to food. We'll be focusing on the food issue and the food crisis that's developing in Africa. About 18 million people, food insecure, directly impacted by what's happening in Ukraine, just in East Africa. Very many people who've left the country, like the ambassador has told us. What's all this about? Let's take that break. We'll be back shortly.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
We are live on KTN Home. We are now also live on KTN News. We are live streaming the show on YouTube and Facebook. It's Eric Latif Ndu Oko CT Muga. Our guest this morning is His Excellency Andriy Pravednyk. He is Ukraine's ambassador to Kenya. We are talking about the impact that Russia's invasion into Ukraine has caused, not just on Ukraine, but to the rest of the world. Your Excellency, we have seen various calls, even from African leaders, on there is this situation in Ukraine to be resolved because it's impacting not just Ukraine, but impacting the rest of the world. We're talking about energy. We're talking about food and food supply. You've heard our own president talk about, all right, we are seeing the rise in fuel prices. It has some sort of correlation with what's happening in Ukraine. The food prices going up, there is correlation with what's happening in Ukraine. Are there any attempts being made at resolving this issue between Ukraine and Russia?
I have to start from saying that, as my president stated on many occasions, we all understand that the peace could only be reached by negotiations. And despite the fact that Russian troops were invading and continue invading Ukraine, we were prepared for negotiations, and in the mid of March and the end of March we had a couple of rounds of negotiations. The last one had been arranged by the Turkish President Erdogan in Istanbul at the end of March, and during that round of negotiations we presented our written proposals to Russian side how we see the peace agreement and ceasefire. Unfortunately, we never received any official answer in written form from Russian Federation. There were some comments made by spokesperson to Russian president and some other politicians, but that was all. We never received any official answer. And Ukraine proposed different provisions how we can reach ceasefire and how we can reach peace agreement. And we went as far as to propose to put aside the issue of Crimea as a separate track and to have a separate negotiations of that. But then what we've heard as a reply from Russian side, but not official one, as I mentioned before, was, no guys, we are going to demilitarize and to denazify you. Crimea is a part of Russia and you have to accept it. It's not under discussion. And we are going to fight Ukraine until the goals of, as they call it, special military operation would be achieved. And initial goals of that operation, and they still confirmed the main ones, is do not denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. But with the pace of time, they started to use a different argument, and the last one used by Russian side was that we were planning to attack Russia, Ukraine and NATO. And that is why they decided to start it before we start our
It was a
attack.
preemptive attack.
Like a preemptive attack. You're absolutely right, sir. But all I can say is that is complete nonsense. It's Russian propaganda, fake news. Ukraine never planned to attack or to invade any other country, any other neighboring country. We are a peaceful country. We were building Ukraine. We were developing our agricultural sector. We were developing other sectors of our economy. And last year we had a record high crop of 80 million metric tons of grain. They're the first time in our history. And that is due to the development of our agricultural sectors by our own farmers. And we were planning to have an even bigger crop this year, but unfortunately Russian invasion started. But even despite that fact, I have to share that with you, Ukrainian farmers who very often suffering from missile attacks or bombs, they actually sowed their grain to have a crop this year, and we already got 3.6 million of grain of this year crop. Means Ukraine, despite all the hostilities,
You're still producing food.
we're still producing food because we understand our responsibility before the international community.
Has Russia made any formal message or sent any formal message to Ukraine with regards to Ukraine's desire to join NATO?
Not just informal, but formal ones. Couple of years ago, a Russian president made it clear that Russia will never accept any further expansion of NATO to the east. But the strange, I would say, if it's the right word to use, thing is that when it comes to Ukraine, Russia and Russian presidents say no further expansion of NATO to the east, will never allow Ukraine to join NATO, but at the same time, his military operation, as he calls it, or rather unprovoked and unjustified invasion to Ukraine, brought completely a different result, that Finland and Sweden joined NATO. And they are also, east of Russia, means there's further eastern expansion of NATO. And what Russian president said about it? He said that it is a sovereign right of Finland and Sweden to join any unions they wish. But why that is not the case with my country, with Ukraine. We also have sovereign right to decide what unions to join. But in the meantime, Russia thinks that we don't have that right. For whatever reason, I think that is based, again, on what we already discussed before, on history and on Russian understanding of history.
Are you prepared to not join NATO?
I would say that if it requires a long-standing peace, I'm sure that Ukraine would be prepared to consider the possibility of not joining NATO. But again, we can only consider the issue if we receive strong security guarantees from international community, because we don't want to experience another Russian invasion in 30 years or 50 years or 70 years, and these guarantees should be legally binding, which means that in case if Russia would try to attack or to invade Ukraine again in the future, the guarantor state would intervene and will help us to defend our country.
Those would be the barest minimums through which we will say, all right, let's have some peace here, if it is guaranteed that Ukrainians' independence is maintained.
Definitely, you are right.
All right. So the issues that Russia would seek over and over again have not changed over 1,000 years. They still remain the same today. But here we are saying that for the sake of peace within Ukraine and for what we're seeing happening around the world, Kenya feeling the impact of this invasion on Ukraine, other countries in the world feeling the impact, a global sense of insecurity because of this. Would Ukraine then be in the position to say, for the sake of those things, then we can let down our guard and say, if you don't invade us, if you respect our sovereignty as a nation, then we're ready to let other things go. Are we at that point?
Not completely. And I will try to understand why I use the word not completely. Definitely, if we have security guarantees for international community, then we are fully prepared to negotiate a long-lasting peace. We are prepared to negotiate ceasefire. But there is one important red line which we will never cross, that the sovereignty over entire territory of Ukraine. What we have now, we have Ukrainian Crimea being temporarily and illegally occupied by Russians from 2014, for 8 years by now. We have, before the 24th of February, we have parts of Donetsk and Lugansk region of Ukraine being occupied by Russians from 2015. Now, even more, they occupied parts of Zaporizhia region and Kherson region and very small part of Mykolaiv region, that all regions in the south of Ukraine. And the Russian plans are to create so-called Novorossiya, as they call it, and to, in a way, cut off Ukraine from the sea and to make Ukraine landlocked country. And definitely, it's a red line we'll never go beyond under no circumstances, because it's our sovereign territory, and we'll never allow anyone to take that from us. And one of the preconditions from our side is that Russians should give up occupation of all that territories, at least in the mainland of Ukraine. And as already mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, we were prepared to put the Crimea issue as a separate track, but and to have a separate negotiations on Crimea. But in case if we offered by Russians to start negotiations, but at the same time Russia would refuse to give up occupied territories, then it's not an option for Ukraine, because again we will have to acknowledge parts of our sovereign territory as part of occupation and Russian regime, and we will never allow our people live under Russian occupation. That is why, to sum up, Ukraine is prepared for negotiations. We realize that the only way to reach a long-standing peace is negotiations. But if there is no willingness of Russia to give up these territories, then I have serious doubts that these peace negotiations or possible peace negotiations might be effective, because we'll never agree. Again, I can only repeat myself that we'll never agree with the fact that around 20% of our territories would remain occupied by Russia.
Your Excellency, when you look at the invasion, if you were to sum up the toll, there's the humanitarian toll, there is the economic toll. How would you sum it up?
It's huge. Again, it's difficult to give you the exact figures of the damages inflicted by Russian invasion,
Yes.
but they're definitely enormous. And according to different preliminary estimations, the total damage caused by Russian invasion amounts to 600/800 billions of dollars. Billion of dollars. Yes. Look, take city of Mariupol. They've completely ruined one of the biggest and most efficient metallurgical plant in Ukraine called Azovstal. The only cost of rebuilding Azovstal is $25 billion. One plant. Take into account hundreds of bridges, hundreds, if not already 1,000 kilometers of paved roads, schools, hospitals, residential buildings, offices, airports. Now, okay, you cannot fly to Ukraine. Okay, the one reason is safety. Okay, but even if the safety situation would allow anyone to fly to Ukraine, almost every single civilian airport is ruined by Russian missile attacks. The only one still intact is Lviv and Uzhgorod, two airports in the western part of Ukraine. But there is no guarantee that Russia will not strike them, let's say, tomorrow or today.
But from what you're saying, it appears that Ukraine is defending itself, but it's Ukraine that constantly is attacked. Has Ukraine made any advances into Russia? Have they pushed the Russian troops back to any degree?
In some areas, yes. In some areas, look, initially they invaded and they were trying to get control over Kyiv, over Chernihiv region, Sumy region, Kharkiv region, and city of Kharkiv. All these four areas, we've managed to push them back. In Kyiv, back to Belarus, Sumy and Chernihiv back to Russia. Kharkiv, we initially managed to push them back to Russia, but they slightly advanced again. But still, the city of Kharkiv is under Ukrainian control. The only challenge for that big and beautiful city is that it's under constant missile attack and artillery attacks every single day. We've advanced in some areas in Kherson region, and we hope that with increased inflow of ammunition and weapons, and sophisticated ammunition and sophisticated weapons from our partners, we will be able to counterattack and liberate, again, at least parts of our territory very soon.
Balozi, earlier I'd asked you the relationship between Ukraine and the rest of the world and how you interact with other countries. Let me come back into that issue. Even now, during this Russian invasion of Ukraine, Ukraine has welcomed foreign fighters to come and help fight and repulse the Russian forces. Ukraine is receiving a lot of military support from America, from Europe, in terms of dollars and equipment. No boots on the ground. This is all going to a battlefield that is inside Ukraine. What is the toll in this? The toll is thousands of Ukrainians killed, millions of Ukrainians displaced externally and internally, thousands of dollars or billions of dollars, like you said, of infrastructure being destroyed. Will you at some point look back and say, in the best interest of Ukraine, let us take decisive action on how to end this invasion, this war that's taking place in our country?
Definitely, we are thinking of that. But again, I would like to reiterate again, my dear colleagues and listeners, that we are talking about the existential existence of Ukraine as a state, Ukrainians as a nation. We are talking about the future of our kids, and we are talking about our own future. And we know that we have to pay a high price. The toll is high. Every day, a number of Ukrainians are dying at the battlefields, at the front lines. But we know the price in a way. We really understand that if we fail and if we allow Russians to succeed, then it will be probably no Ukraine. It will be probably no Ukrainian nation. It will be Ukrainian nation, but it will be scattered all around the world, because I'm convinced that most of Ukrainians will never accept living under occupation again.
Is there a price too high?
The price is really too high. We know that. But again, I would like to come back to the point that we are not saying no to negotiations. We are fully prepared to negotiate. But in our understanding, negotiation should be undertaken in a way in no preconditions. But when you come to a negotiating table, and one side, and in that case I will be very, very open with you, Russia, put on the table some preconditions which are by themselves are not acceptable to us, then these negotiations will not lead to a long-lasting peace and to a solution which would guarantee Ukrainians to live in peace. And that is why it is so important to continue international pressure on Russia, that Russia should actually not bring to negotiating table any preconditions, that the only way to reach long-lasting peace and a solution will guarantee the existence of Ukraine.
Do you think the rest of the world is taking sufficient action to see an end to this, looking at the cost of this to the rest of the world in terms of even food security?
I think that it would not be probably correct to say the whole world, but the most of world nations support Ukraine. And I can only mention the resolution, UN General Assembly resolution adopted at the beginning of March, called on the Russian aggression to Ukraine, and that resolution had been supported by 141 countries. the UN membership consists of 193 countries, meaning that more than 70% of the countries in the world voted for. That means supported Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression and Russian invasion. Definitely, a number of countries assist Ukraine with ammunition, weapons, with medical supplies, with everything we need, but not just to fight, but also with a lot of humanitarian assistance, since, as we already mentioned, internally displaced persons need shelters, need places to live, need some clothing, because homes had been ruined by Russian missiles and bombs. And we really appreciate it. Definitely, there are a number of countries in the world which support Ukraine in the international organizations, and we really appreciate that support. And I would like to express our gratitude to Kenya, and gratitude from all my compatriots and from me personally to Kenya for being so supportive, especially within the realms of international organizations. And I'm sure all of you, or most of you, heard the statement delivered by the Kenyan permanent representative, Ambassador Kimani, which actually was really great one, and actually showed the strong support of Kenya, of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Ambassador, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. Ambassador, His Excellency Andriy Pravednyk is a Ukrainian ambassador to Kenya. He's been here talking to us about the latest war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the impact that it's having to the world. Asante sana.
Thank you very much indeed. It was my honor being here today, and I hope that I'll have another opportunity in the future to talk about the peace solution and rebuilding of Ukraine. Thanks.